Hello, my name is Roz Dimon. I'm an artist who has been working with technology with my work since 1984. And I'm here today with artist Colin Goldberg. And he actually coined the term Techspressionism in 2011 and is the co-curator of Techspressionism 2021, an international juried exhibition opening in summer 2021 at Techexpressionism.com. Hello, Colin.
Hey, how you doing, Roz? Thanks for asking me to come do the interview.
Good to be with you. So, Colin, tell us a little bit about your background. Where you were born, where you live and practice now, and maybe your cultural influences.
Sure. So I was born in the Bronx in 1971, and I grew up out here on the east end of Long Island, where we both are. I actually grew up in Southampton, and my dad taught chemistry out there at Southampton College. That's how we ended up moving out to that area. And now I live a little bit further west on the north shore of Long Island in a town called Rocky Point with my wife Donna and our daughter Aya. Um, so as far as cultural influences go, I have a mixed heritage. So my mom is of Japanese ancestry and my father is of Jewish ancestry. And I
Wow.
would definitely, I would say that my grandma Camille was definitely a major influence on me as an artist. She was trained in Shodo, which is the art of Japanese calligraphy, and she taught that in Hawaii, where she lived, and also in Japan, where she emigrated from when she was 16. Her maiden name was actually Noguchi, so sometimes I like to think that maybe I'm a distant relative of Isamu Noguchi, but I have
Nice.
no evidence of that.
How interesting. That's really interesting. Thanks. So, Colin, what made you become an artist? Or when did you know that this is what you wanted to do in your life?
Well, I always kind of got lost in drawing when I was a kid, and I guess I'm just one of those people that never stopped. I was kind of involved in art all through high school and voted class artist when I graduated from Southampton High School back in '90. And then I went on to SUNY Binghamton for my undergrad studies. And I really wasn't sure if I was going to be an art major. I was also considering computer science. But there were a couple things that happened while I was in school that definitely put me on the path. One of them was that in the summer, after my junior year, I did an internship working with an artist named Steve Miller, who's part of our Techspressionism group. And
Yeah.
I was his studio assistant out in Sagaponack.
Cool.
And that yeah, that was a really amazing experience. It was the first time I saw the inside of like a working artist studio. I'd only really been exposed to the work of my professors prior to that. So I got to sort of see how his studio operated from a business standpoint. And I also got to learn silkscreen printing. And there was another assistant there by the name of Robert Barden, who was like an amazing printer. He actually printed for Andy Warhol for many years.
Wow.
And that experience definitely provided some inspiration to become an artist. And it was really interesting to hear him tell stories about how he worked with Andy and stuff like that. Definitely, my undergrad painting professor also, or actually I had two professors, but one in particular, a guy that by the name of Angelo Ippolito, was a big influence as far as making me want to be an artist or follow that path. And he was a second generation New York school abstract expressionist painter. So he was the person really responsible for getting me interested in abstraction. And I remember when a student asked him in class what his work was about, and he said it's about paint, and he kind
Yeah.
of believed that like it was someone else's job to interpret the work, and his job was just to paint and make the work. And there's kind of a funny story I have about my two painting professors. So I had two professors, Ippolito and Shapiro, and I remember Shapiro telling us, it's great to be an artist, but if you have the brains to be a dentist, go be a dentist. You know, And then Ippolito told us, if you want to be an artist, go to New York and give it a shot. And he emigrated to New York from Italy when Mussolini was in power, and he
Oh,
came here
wow.
to this country, to find a better life, and he kind of lived and worked downtown, and knew, Pollock and that whole crew of people. He came around, slightly after the first generation of the New York School painters.
Wow.
So, when I graduated, I pretty much took Ippolito's advice and, moved to New York, moved into my first
You
studio.
didn't become a dentist?
No, I didn't, much to my parents' chagrin. They were both chemists,
Oh,
but they've always been supportive of me, following the path that I chose. So, and I moved to Brooklyn when I graduated, to Williamsburg back in '94, and something happened there too that was definitely a pretty major change that happened in terms of influencing my work. Was that when I first moved to Brooklyn, I was coming back from a temp job, and I was wearing a suit, and coming back underneath the Williamsburg Bridge, I got jumped and I got my jaw broken in a couple places. And
oh,
this is like before, Williamsburg was gentrified. It was like chop
yeah.
shops, garbage on the street and stuff. And I lived in sort of like an old bank building that was not 100% legal live workspace. I was renting
I can
from
relate. Yeah.
another artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually an artist named Joan Bankemper, who I still follow her work. She was my studio mate. She didn't live there, but it was an amazing space, but the neighborhood was pretty rough. So like after that happened, I decided I was going to move across the river to the East Village, and I moved into a tiny little apartment on Second and Second, and I didn't have the room to paint anymore. And that's really when I started getting into digital work. I was doing actually this is before the web, so I was doing CD-ROM development at a
Absolutely.
multimedia shop, yeah, back in
I
and I
remember
was
those
doing
days.
Director and
Yeah.
Lingo and all that stuff. So and then got involved in web work really early on, but that was in that same neighborhood in the East Village. So yeah, so I've always kind of like had my foot in both worlds as far as commercial art and my own personal practice, and I think those two sides really inform one another in a lot of ways.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Absolutely. Great. Now, by the way, I changed it from split screen so you're more in speaker view and people can see your background a little bit bigger on the screen. The next question I had was, who and what were your influences? I think you've spoken about that a little, but do you want to elaborate more on that? And I think the whole commercial and fine art aspect is really interesting too, but whatever you want to say.
Okay, yeah, I mean, well, definitely, like the the influence of my grandmother and Shoto calligraphy, I think, was an influence on my painting style. The works behind me are a couple paintings in progress right now, and a lot of the my approach to painting is kind of like a mashup of a calligraphic approach and gestural sort of painting that was um, kind of inspired to some degree by the abstract expressionist painters and so on and so forth. But also Japanese woodcut artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige influenced my work in terms of the line quality they have and sort of their compositional style. On the Western side, definitely Abex painters like Franz Klein, Jackson Pollock.
Yeah.
Their sort of gestural approach I always found really interesting. Klein always denied that there was any sort of influence of Japanese calligraphy on his work, but there's an interesting connection with Franz Klein and technology in that the big black and white paintings that he's famous for that are just these big bold brush marks,
Oh
they
yeah, I love
actually
them.
have they have technology as part of their story, in that he got to a point where he had sort of like an artist block. He didn't, he just couldn't come up with any new ideas, and he was friends with Willem de Kooning. So he went
Yeah.
over to de Kooning's studio. This is like in, I believe, the 50s, and de Kooning had a Bell, I think it was like a Bell Panopticon opaque projector that this was like the newest tech at the time, that you could enlarge an image up onto the wall.
Yeah.
So Klein had been making these little drawings, charcoal drawings of like chairs and pieces of furniture, and he took one of them and blew it up giant onto the wall, and took a little tiny section of it, and then he sort of painstakingly reproduced it on a giant scale. And that's sort of the origin story of those paintings. So like, I had always pictured him like this crazy man, like throwing paint and giant brushes or knives, but it really, like, it was very painstakingly composed, and the technology of the time was involved in it. So when I heard that story, it really struck a chord with me that a lot of times there will be technology involved in an artist's work. It's just not overtly evident. Like, I know a lot of Frank Stella's work involved computer-based composition, even though they were executed as paintings down the
Right.
road. So
No, that's a very, very interesting, good point.
and then also as far as influences go, like pop artists like Warhol and Rauschenberg, they were using photo silkscreen, which was the sort of the commercial tool of their time, and that kind of allowed me to feel like the ability to experiment with large format inkjet printing and printing on top of painted surfaces as legitimate, essentially, as
Yeah.
it's still a painting.
Yeah.
If a
Right.
Rauschenberg painting with a photo silkscreen on top of it is still called a painting, then to me, a painting with an inkjet print on top of it is also still a painting. It's
Right.
just 30 years later. So yeah, I would say, like, the influences are fairly diverse, and certainly the digital realm in general, wireframe models, um, uh, cyberpunk literature like William Gibson, all that
Yes.
sort of stuff. Certainly Star Wars as a kid growing up in the 70s, huge influence culturally. All of those things, I think, play a role in my work, and street art too. I definitely, I remember growing up, going to visit my other grandma in the Bronx and seeing the trains all covered in tags and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I was of the generation where all of our schoolmates would be into break dancing and rap music. It was kind of before it was even called hip hop and
Yeah.
stuff. And so like that sort of culture, I think, has I think it's sort of like found a little bit of a revival in the crypto art community, in the sense that a lot of crypto art artists, they go by a handle or a tag, or street art, artists like Banksy and stuff like that too. I mean, I don't really incorporate that into my own work or sort of artistic identity, but I think it's interesting.
Can you just expand for a minute on crypto art? Because people will be seeing this interview who don't know what crypto art is. And if you just for a few minutes, and
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this is something that I actually learned about through Techspressionism, through one of our artists that joined up, a guy named Andrea Bonacito, I think, or I don't know if I'm butchering his name, but he's an Italian artist that's in London right now. But he kind of explained it to me, and basically, crypto art is a medium. It's also referred to at this point as NFTs, which stands for non-fungible tokens. And a non-fungible token is basically a way of an artist creating their own unique sort of cryptocurrency, in a sense. It's a token that's authenticated on the Ethereum blockchain. So it allows the owner to establish authenticity, that they actually are the owner of that particular piece. So it's, it could be a JPEG or an MP4 video file. A lot of them are animations. But the thing that makes them unique is the fact that they are unique, that they're actually one of a kind, or they're also able to be minted by the artist as additions. So it's a
thanks so
whole,
much. Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole sort of world
I
in
know we could
itself.
go
And
down that rabbit hole. It is interesting.
yeah,
I know
yeah.
it has to do with
It's
provenance, but
fascinating though. I would
yeah.
definitely check out. There's a site called Super Rare, and there's another one called Rareable, that are both really solid crypto art marketplaces.
Thanks. I think that's good for those of us who work in digital media to let audiences who are listening to this know, hey, this is the next. It's happening. It's very interesting. Thanks. Before we look at your work, Colin, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your process before I share the screen or you share it?
Yeah, sure. And actually, you know what? I mean, I was gonna show something at the end of the interview about what I'm working on currently, but I think it's actually relevant to this question. So is
Great.
it all right if I share my screen now? So I
Yeah.
was gonna show basically back here behind me, these are two paintings that are in progress. They're oil and inkjet on linen,
Cool.
and they're smaller pieces. Actually, I don't know if you do the Guildhall member show, but I've been doing it for I don't know, last number
I
of
think
years.
it's a way to support the museum and it's fun and yeah.
Yeah, so like that was sort of a an impetus to get me going, making some small work. So I'm gonna hopefully they'll be dry by the submission deadline. Um, but these are
For those who
pieces
don't
that
know, Guildhall is a museum, a wonderful museum out here in East Hampton. Thanks.
yeah, absolutely. So let me share my screen really quick and hang on a second. Okay, can you see my
Great.
screen?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So, these are the first. These are images of those two pieces. The first layer is oil on linen, so it's a straight oil painting. And then what I do is I take a picture of it and bring it into the computer, and then I draw onto it in Adobe Illustrator using my Wacom tablet to create an image for an overprint. And then I take that image and I actually run the painted canvas, or in this case linen, through my printer, which is an Epson 9800. It's a large format printer. And I use a special primer called Ink Aid, which allows me to print onto the painted surfaces.
Wow.
So this is sort of, and I'll switch this one.
So the one on the right is
On
the
here.
beginning painting, and then you're showing the layers in Photoshop.
Yeah, well, these are actually two separate pieces. There's number one and number two. So this is the first layer of them,
Gotcha.
which is just a painting, straight up painting. And then this is the second layer of the two pieces, and they're fairly similar. There's actually some meaning behind the work too. Like after the events that happened at the Capitol, like it really started me thinking about, there was a guy wearing sort of like a Camp Auschwitz T-shirt and stuff like that, and it made me remember sort of like experiencing some anti-Semitic things in my life when I was around people that just assumed I wasn't Jewish because I look Asian.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you can tell, but there's a Star of David sort of incorporated. It's abstracted into the forms a little bit,
Yeah.
and also other sort of like identity elements. I guess the political climate had made me sort of like think about what it means to be a minority within a minority,
Yeah.
so that's kind of like where my head was at, and it wasn't really like even intended. And in fact, when I started the work with the painting, that wasn't even an idea in my head. It wasn't until sort of like after what happened, at the Capitol, that like something was going on in my mind that, like I used the abstract work to sort of like process things. So the next layer
I like
is
hearing that
actually,
because I think it's great when artists are working on raising the bar to work on multiple layers and sharing that a little bit with.
yeah, I mean, underneath the abstraction, there's always something there. A
Yeah.
lot of times I don't even know what it is and I'm not conscious of it I mean, in this case, I sort of like identified an idea and kind of like worked with it. So this is the next layer, which basically I took these empty areas and masked them off with tape and then painted back in sort of like a hard edge way with more oils
Oh,
to
interesting.
do these two different variations here. And then the final layer, which I actually just finished this morning, or the most recent, it's not the final layer, but was another sort of a layer of gestural mark making.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably going to be one more layer of sort of wireframe forms that are going to be printed on top. So that's kind of like where these pieces are at. But yeah, that's
Beautiful.
what I'm working on currently, and my process kind of like all in one, and the printer that I have is actually it's an older Epson, but back in 2014, actually the day before my wife and I got married, I got a call from the Pollock Foundation chairman, and he told me that I got awarded a Pollock grant, which I had applied for,
Congratulations. That's
almost a
great.
year prior to that. That was back in 2014. So I used some of that money to buy the printer, and I use that printer in almost all of my work.
And Colin, if I understand, I think you're saying you actually put the paint. Do you put the painting through the printer? Did I get that wrong, or?
Yeah, no, I actually run run the painting directly through the printer, and I
And
print
then
onto the
and then
painted
your
surface.
computer image goes on top. That's so fascinating. Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
that was actually a technique that I learned in graduate school. I did, my MFA in computer art out at Bowling Green in Ohio, and I studied under, well, a couple instructors. Dina Eber was the professor that taught me those techniques about digital overprinting, and I also studied under a guy named Greg Little, who was he was studied painting at Yale. Really interesting artist, does VR work and stuff like that. And then my
Cool.
third graduate advisor is an art historian by the name of Andrew Hirschberger. And those three people were definitely, also big influences on sort of my formative time in grad school.
Great. I just switched back, so we're sort of sharing the screen. I'm just sort of making it a little more interesting for a Zoom interview, which is how we're doing this interview. Would you like to share any more of your work and just to show us a little bit about how your work may have evolved artistically and technically, or did we just do that, or would you like to go a little further into that?
Yeah, sure. I kind of
Just so we
yeah,
see a
I'll
little
show you.
bit.
I'll take you. Maybe I'll just take you through some stuff on my site that lets you see
Perfect.
kind of like how it evolved.
Yeah,
Um,
that'd be
okay.
great.
So, can you see my screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So down at the bottom of my site, I have my work kind of organized by series. And I'll start with the earlier stuff. So initially, I was just painter, no digital work involved. These are all older oil paintings from college. This one was actually the first piece that I ever showed publicly, and it was exhibited at the Parish Art Museum when it was back in Southampton for the East End student show back in 1989.
Oh,
That
wow.
was a fairly large piece,
Nice.
36 by 60 acrylic. And let's see. When I was an undergrad, that's when I sort of started getting involved with computers. And I grew up, my first computer was a Commodore 64, and I played a lot with like ASCII animation, and I had a light pen, and I always enjoyed
That's
seeing
an Amiga,
the.
right? A Commodore
Uh,
Amiga.
it was the 64 actually, so it was
Oh, it's
before the
before.
Amiga.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was also in the BBS scene and had a modem. So a lot of the cracking groups and freaking groups would have these really amazing digital art intros that were almost like sort of street art type stuff. Um, so this work is I call my photo construct series, and this is definitely inspired in part by artists like Rauschenberg and Warhol, where they integrated photographic content. Like these are silkscreen pieces that I did when I was in college, where I was actually taking these a couple different photographs that I took. This one had a castle and like a kind of a water background. Then I photoshopped them together and then burned a screen in the darkroom actually and screen printed it. That was during an independent study that I did where I had sort of access to a dark room. And then this piece here is called Pollock Studio, and it's based on a couple images that I took at Jackson Pollock Studio. You could see his barn. This is his actual studio, which was a kind of like a barn or a shed where he made his drip paintings. And this is really kind of obscured, but it's a big boulder in his backyard. But that piece actually was taken into the permanent collection of the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center back in 2005.
Fabulous. Yeah, wow, that's great.
So in '99 is when I really started doing straight digital work. That's when I moved to that smaller apartment. And this series, which I call Metagraphs, are vector-based digital drawings that are, just basically drawn on my Wacom tablet. So they started in '99.
Are you
Most
using
of them were made
Illustrator?
from
Are you
'99.
Adobe Illustrator kind of vector?
Yeah, they were all drawn in Illustrator.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of this body of work was done between '99 and 2005. And this piece in particular was kind of like a bridge piece. It's called Suggesture. And this was the first piece that incorporated these sort of wireframe forms that
Yeah.
then, I kind of, this was the start of a whole new body of work, which, I call my Wireframe series that I would consider the work behind me, the wireframes aren't actually incorporated into them yet, but they're going to be wireframe paintings. And they incorporate these wireframe forms, which really are based on the idea of a gesture. That is, I'll make a gestural mark on the tablet and then rotate it in 3D space or extrude it in 3D space to create these wireframe forms, which I consider almost to be like volumetric gestures in a sense. And so this one here, let's see, where is it? Yeah, this one here was acquired by Stony Brook Hospital back in 2019 for their cancer ward.
Nice.
And it's called Dynamic Dispatch. The ones on top are the most recent ones from that series. And these were all done in 2020, those pieces.
They're wonderful. I can
Thank
almost
you.
feel your I don't know, your science parents and the art and the calligraphy, all your influences. It's there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think everything kind of like melds together, and then just the output is the images, and these ones are directly influenced by the Japanese calligraphy. And when I was in grad school, actually, there was an artist who asked me, did you ever work with Sumi ink? And I hadn't. So he's like, oh, I have some. He gave me a jar of Sumi ink. So I started doing these ink paintings and then composing drawings that I then printed on top of the ink paintings. And this is just sort of like a smaller set of works on paper.
They're quite iconic as well.
Oh, thank you. And then this series is probably the most recently started series, the Biomorphic Series. And they're also based on gestural marks, but instead of rendering them out as wireframes, I've been rendering them out as sort of like plastic objects, so to speak. So they have shading. And then I convert those objects to outlines. So they're almost like contour drawings and flatten them, and then kind of like contort and twist those forms. So, I end up with some pretty unexpected and weird, compositions. And a lot of, what I do is experimentation. So this one actually was created in 2019, and I called it Shinzo because, and that's the Japanese word for heart, because it reminded me of a heart.
Yes.
And then later in that year, I actually found out that I needed to get open heart surgery, which
Oh,
I had that year. But it was strange because it was almost like something was telling me that that was, that was going to happen.
how
Um,
prescient. Yeah.
so that's pretty much, the spectrum of the different bodies of work. And my latest addition to my site is this online viewing room, which I created using Kunstmatrix. And that's the platform that we're going to use for Techspressionism to do our juried show. But this, lets you see some of the pieces that I did over the course of 2020 in kind of like a 3D space. So
Beautiful. So nice. Wow. Love seeing that whole progression. Thank you so much.
sure thing.
I'm sure we could talk about it more, but I think I do want to get in a few questions about Techspressionism and, tell us a little about your thoughts about Techspressionism.
Okay, yeah. Well, so I came up with this term Techspressionism back in 2011, and it was really just the title of a solo show. I had to, I had basically bartered a website job with somebody who had a space in Southampton, kind of like a rental gallery, and I did a self-produced show that my wife Donna helped me hang, and I had to come up with a title for it, and that's where Techspressionism came from as a word. It was just the title that I thought was a clever combination of technology and expressionism. And like I kind of kept it around, like I used it for a couple different shows. Helen Harrison, who's our group advisor now, she actually wrote the essay for that exhibition catalog, and her
Nice.
essay, that
I read
expanded
her
on the
things in the New
idea.
York Times. She's awesome.
Yeah, she's been a critic for the Times, and also was a curator at both the Parish Art Museum and Guildhall prior to being at the Pollock House.
Right.
And she's got a huge amount of knowledge about the expressionist artists and just sort of art history in general. So she was able to take that idea and relate it to some of the expressionist painters of the past. And um, last summer, I did a Google News search just randomly for Techspressionism, and I saw that there was an artist named Oz Van Rosen who was in Southampton who had used the term in a magazine article, and I thought, wow, that's interesting, that other artists are actually starting to use this term. So I reached out to her to see if she had any interest in trying to put a group together of other artists, using technology based around this word or term. And she liked the idea. So, I reached out to Steve Miller, who also incorporates technology into his work. He does a lot of, it's a lot of silkscreen work, but the imagery is scientific imagery that incorporates things like MRIs, X-rays. He's worked with scientists at CERN in Switzerland to, develop different types of imagery. So, a lot of his
Excellent
work
work. It's
really,
really,
yeah,
yeah.
it incorporates technology both in its execution, and in the content. And he thought it was a good idea. He encouraged me to move forward with it, and he actually helped me sort of formulate the initial content for the site, and kind of like the plan of using the hashtag Techspressionism on Instagram as a way to try to like locate artists who related to the idea. So I ran that by Helen Harrison, and she thought it was a good idea, and she thought that maybe it'd be good, a good thing to organize a show to locate other artists, kind of as an incentive to get involved. And she, at that time, agreed, to be the group's advisor. So that to me was like an instant green light of like, okay, so there's a legitimate, art historian involved now, and that put sort of lit a fire under me to invest some energy into the project. Um, so at that point, I reached out to my friend Patrick Lichty, who I went to grad school with at Bowling Green. We did our MFA studies together in computer art there. And, he was teaching in Abu Dhabi at the time. He actually just moved back to the States. He's going to be a professor at Winona University. And then the five of us, myself, Steve, Oz, Patrick and Helen met on Zoom, and that was sort of like our first salon where we talked about the definition of Techspressionism and sort of hashed out the current working definition, which is an artistic approach in which technology is utilized as a means to express emotional experience. So it really is based on the definition of expressionism, but it's expressionism that incorporates technology, basically, or uses technology to express this emotional experience or subjective experience. And then since then, currently we have about 200 artists in our index at techspressionism.com from over 30 countries. So it's pretty amazing. Since August, it's grown pretty rapidly, and I think a big part of it has been these salons, which you've been a part of on Zoom, which we just started recording and publishing on our YouTube channel. And that was actually Devante's idea. There's another artist who's been pretty heavily involved, Devante Bradley, who's been helping moderate the sessions. And it was his suggestion that we record and publish them. It's been really interesting and also kind of based on this idea of social sculpture, which was an idea that a German artist came up with, a guy by the name of Joseph Beuys, who is a Fluxus artist.
Yeah, kind of a textbook name. Yeah.
Yeah, and he kind of defined a social sculpture as human activity that strives to structure and shape society or the environment, and that the central idea of a social sculptor is an artist who creates structures in society using language, thoughts, actions, and objects. So this is actually an idea that was introduced to me by another artist member of ours, Joseph Necktal, who he's really a pioneer in digital art and new media art, and he related this idea of social sculpture to me when we were living near each other down in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and it always kind of stuck with me in the sense of how artists can be activists.
Yes, they sure can. Just like poets, we can be outlawed, but beauty can be dangerous.
Absolutely.
Colin, this has been wonderful to talk to you. I guess the final thing we just wanted to discuss, which I think you've already gotten into, but before I sign us off here, I just want to, do you have anything you want to say about the future of art and where you see Techspressionism or what we're doing as part of that or not?
Yeah, sure. So, I really think that since digital tools have become widely available, it's really changed the definition of what an artist is, and also it's made the idea of being an artist much more accessible to more people. People probably who never would have considered themselves an artist are playing with apps. They're doing all sorts of things, making videos and creating stuff, which is pretty cool. Mass media like animated movies, like Pixar movies and stuff, and video games, those are really created, a viable career path for people who want to be artists, which didn't really exist as much before, and digital art now is a whole new field of study within academia.
Absolutely.
That being said, that is a big reason why I wanted to develop Techspressionism as something where it's an artistic movement versus a means of production. So to me, a lot of what's called digital art, it encompasses both individual artist creations, but also Pixar movies and video games. So to me, Techspressionism much more closely refers to the work of an individual artist. And I think that there's a huge crossover for all artists working with technology between their commercial and personal practices. And I think that artists today need to have their kind of feet in both worlds as far as, artists working with technology in order to stay current. Definitely, like the commercial work I've done through the years it's allowed my drawings and paintings to move in a direction they never would have without technology.
Yeah, the Renaissance, one of the highest points in art. Hey, they didn't have a separation of, good commercial and fine, really, but the cream always rises to the top in a way. So that's always an interesting concept too. But I love your approach with this and what you're saying, because I think technology always, it gets messy sometimes because it does promote more democracy
Hmm. It's
and
true,
access,
and
as you were
you know,
saying.
when it's funny because when I was in grad school, the undergrad students major was called digital art, and the grad students it was called computer art because the faculty it didn't make the transition yet in terms of the nomenclature. You know, we were still computer art, and the undergrad students were digital art, and most of them didn't care at all about hanging something on a wall. They just want to get a job at Pixar or make the next Grand Theft Auto.
Wow.
So like
When
to
I
me,
started,
like
there was
within
nothing, no digital art, or barely.
it's true, and like I think it's interesting, but like there's also something to be said about you know the idea of the medium being the message. Like people like Cindy Sherman, for instance, she
Yeah,
creates
Mark.
her work photographically, but she always defined herself primarily as an artist, and her work is about identity. It's not about the fact that she's a photographer or
Yes,
uses a camera,
yes,
and that distinction really helped move photography out of these segregated photography galleries. And I mean, she had a major solo retrospective at MoMA,
there you have it.
completely legitimized photographic work, and not artists including her, not her alone, but I mean certainly that mentality that it's just an aside that it happened to be a camera that was involved in the creation of these pictures. The
Good
important
point.
thing is the pictures, so I think that digital is a few decades behind photography, certainly, its development, but it's part of that same continuum. So, I'm hoping that down the road, it's really going to be the content of the work that artists like you and I create that gets looked at, not necessarily the tools we use.
I really like that you're saying that. It really makes it a more exciting thing, and to tether it to the history of art. And yet it speaks so uniquely to our time. It's been so wonderful to interview you, and your work is so exciting. And
Ross.
I'm pleased to be part of this Techspressionism, wherever it's going. It's really been interesting. I'm pleased to be a part of it. It's been an honor to interview you today. And
Thank you,
I'll
Roz.
see you soon, probably right here on the screen.
Absolutely. Sounds good.